Evelyn Carter clutched her daughter's small hand tightly as they stepped onto American Airlines Flight 2187 from Atlanta to New York, her heart both hopeful and heavy with the weight of history and unspoken challenges. 7-year-old Zora, dressed in a vibrant sunshine yellow dress that seemed to light up the narrow aisle, walked with an air of innocent determination. In one hand she held her cherished stuffed elephant, Ellie, and in the other she gripped her mother's fingers as if anchoring herself against the unpredictable world around them. From the very moment they boarded, Evelyn sensed that the family name they carried would stir something deep and unsettling among those around them, setting in motion a series of events that would expose old wounds and fresh cruelty. Evelyn had chosen these seats carefully, savoring the thought that her daughter and she could share a moment of quiet connection before a long day ahead. It was a journey not only to New York for Evelyn's critical client presentation at Horizon Media, where she had just been promoted to senior marketing director, but also a deeply personal pilgrimage. Zora was about to meet her great-grandfather, Jeremiah Williams, a man whose legacy in the Tuskegee Airmen had become a quiet beacon in the family history. Despite her many years navigating the harsh realities of corporate America and the subtle prejudices that came with it, Evelyn still held on to a fierce hope that one day, the truth and beauty of their past would be recognized without reservation. As they settled into their row 14 seats, Zora's excitement bubbled over when she asked, "Mommy, can I have the window seat? I want to see the clouds make shapes." Evelyn smiled gently, remembering the care she had always taken to let her daughter embrace life's small joys, even as she guarded her from a world that so often seemed unkind. But the calm was abruptly shattered when a flight attendant named Heather, with her artificially bright blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, announced that a seating adjustment was necessary. "I'm sorry, but we need to make a seating adjustment," Heather said, in a tone that was overly polite yet edged with an unsettling firmness. Evelyn's heart sank as she heard Heather explain that a family with a pressing medical need was waiting to be accommodated in row 27, near the lavatories. "We have a family that needs to sit together," Heather explained, her voice low enough to hint at secrets, while her smile remained fixed in a rehearsed pattern. Evelyn's mind raced with worry, not just for the inconvenience but for what it symbolized. The suggested move was not only a separation from the carefully chosen seats, but also a blatant reminder that her presence, and by extension her daughter's, was being treated as less important than that of others. This was not merely a scheduling error. It was an act loaded with an unspoken hierarchy. Across the aisle, a tall man with a polished demeanor introduced himself as Dr. Richard Whitley, adding another layer of tension. "Perhaps I can help," he said smoothly, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to having his way. His family, consisting of his wife and a son who looked nearly the same age as Zora, was being prioritized, all because of a claimed medical condition that required proximity to the lavatories. The air grew thick with resentment, as Evelyn's logical plea for fairness was met with cold, unyielding responses. "We specifically booked these seats so that my daughter and I could remain together," she said firmly, her voice trembling slightly with a mix of indignation and desperation. Yet the reply was dismissive, as if her needs were being erased by an invisible but oppressive force. Heather's tone, which had earlier sounded merely procedural, shifted subtly as she insisted, "The other family would like to sit together as well." There was no empathy in her words, only the sharp edge of bureaucratic cruelty. The White family standing nearby, a tall, distinguished man in his 40s, a stylish blonde woman, and a boy wearing a crisp private school uniform, seemed almost to hover in the background, symbols of an unspoken societal order that placed Evelyn and Zora at a disadvantage. When Evelyn tried to reason that the first-class seats might have been a better option for the medical family, Heather's smile tightened further, and the implication was clear. Their needs were secondary, and their worth as passengers was in question. Feeling the stir of rising anger and despair, Evelyn's mind flashed back to past experiences of subtle yet pervasive discrimination. She remembered painful moments at restaurants and in public places, times when her family had been forced to the fringes by an indifferent society. Now, on this flight, the echoes of that history were being amplified by the cold efficiency of airline policies and the calculated indifference of those enforcing them. Zora's small fingers squeezed Ellie's worn trunk as she sensed the tension, her innocent eyes wide with the dawning realization that something was very wrong. Then came Patricia, an older flight attendant with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, whose reputation for enforcing rules with an iron hand preceded her. Her gaze, as she approached, was heavy with the burden of authority and something far more menacing. "Ma'am, we need you to cooperate with crew member instructions," Patricia said, her tone devoid of any warmth, as if Evelyn's family were a minor inconvenience in her long career. Evelyn's heart pounded as she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "I have paid for these seats, and my daughter and I need to stay together. This is not about a safety issue, but about basic fairness." Yet Patricia's eyes narrowed as she demanded, "What is your name, ma'am?" When Evelyn replied, "Evelyn Carter," Patricia's features flickered with something akin to shock before settling into a mask of cold resolve. The tension escalated when Patricia inquired about the family connection to Jeremiah Williams, the name that was both a legacy and a burden. "Any relation to Jeremiah Williams?" she asked, her voice suddenly softening before hardening again into an expression of cruel indifference. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before answering, "He is my father's friend and my daughter's great-grandfather." The revelation, meant to be a bridge between generations, instead ignited a bitter rivalry. Patricia's demeanor shifted abruptly from feigned professionalism to a look that blended personal resentment with a deep, unyielding sense of superiority. "Sir Jeremiah Williams saved my father's life during the war," Patricia declared, her voice rising in a tone that bordered on fanaticism. "He risked everything over Dresden in 1945. It was as if the mere mention of that name compelled Patricia to claim an authority that went far beyond any protocol, and in doing so, she made it clear that Evelyn and her daughter were now obstacles in a long-standing vendetta fueled by jealousy and old grudges. As Patricia's words echoed through the cabin, Evelyn felt an overwhelming mix of sorrow and outrage. Here was a woman whose personal history had been intertwined with that of a war hero, and yet she chose this moment to assert her dominance over a mother and her child. The cruelty in Patricia's eyes was unmistakable, a cruelty that went beyond mere enforcement of rules and entered the realm of calculated emotional abuse. Even Dr. Whitley's interjection, meant to calm the situation, fell flat against the tide of hostility that Patricia had unleashed. "These passengers are keeping their seats," she insisted, her voice leaving no room for discussion as she ushered the Whitley family away with an icy finality that made it clear her word was law. Evelyn, who had spent her life fighting against the tide of indifference and prejudice, now found herself at the mercy of a system that seemed determined to strip her of dignity. The soft hum of the airplane and the murmur of other passengers became a background to her internal monologue, a litany of memories of past humiliations and a deep-seated fear that her daughter might one day have to bear the same burdens she had fought so hard to overcome. When Heather returned to offer a hot chocolate as a conciliatory gesture, it felt less like kindness and more like a cold reminder that every action on this flight was tainted by a hierarchy of worth. "Compliments of the flight crew," Heather said, placing the drinks on the tray tables with a mechanical precision that did little to soothe the raw sting of the earlier confrontation. Left with little choice, Evelyn agreed to speak with Patricia when given a moment away from the prying eyes of the other passengers. In the cramped galley area, away from the public view yet still under the oppressive scrutiny of airline authority, Patricia's professional mask slipped for a moment. She confided in a hushed tone that she had flown for 37 years and had never imagined that her duty would lead her into such a tangled web of personal history and unhealed wounds. The conversation, intended to be a private resolution, instead revealed the deep-seated pain and unresolved grievances that had driven Patricia to treat Evelyn's family with such brutal indifference. Patricia spoke of her father, Lieutenant Jack Harrington, a bomber pilot whose B-17 had been hit over Dresden in February 1945. The story, marked by a profound mix of valor and tragedy, was recounted with a fervor that seemed to justify every harsh word she had uttered. Evelyn listened with a mixture of empathy and sorrow, feeling the weight of history press down on her shoulders. The cruel irony of the situation was not lost on her. Here was a woman whose own losses had driven her to act with a cruelty that was disproportionate to any airline policy, a cruelty that left Evelyn and little Zora feeling small and undeserving of respect. When the conversation turned to old photographs, faded images of young pilots standing before gleaming P-51 Mustangs, Evelyn saw not just the faces of war heroes, but the reflection of a legacy marred by both sacrifice and betrayal. In one picture, a black pilot and a white pilot stood side by side, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and triumph, a poignant reminder that even in the darkest times, unity had once been possible. Yet the bitterness in Patricia's tone as she recounted that day made it clear that reconciliation was a distant dream. Evelyn's heart ached not only for the history lost to time, but also for the immediate injustice that she and her daughter were enduring at that very moment. She wondered how many times in her own life she had been forced to fight for something as simple as the right to sit together on a flight, to travel with dignity, and to be seen as human rather than as an inconvenience. As the plane began to taxi and the seatbelt sign chimed, signaling that it was time for takeoff, Evelyn sat back in her seat with a heavy heart, determined to face the challenges ahead despite the pain of this encounter. Zora, still clutching Ellie and the lingering warmth of her mother's reassurance, looked up with wide, questioning eyes. Evelyn softly explained that sometimes the past casts long shadows, and that names, especially those that carried stories of bravery and sacrifice, often brought with them burdens that could not easily be cast aside. In that moment, as she prepared herself for the long flight and the uncertain reunion awaiting them in New York, Evelyn resolved that she would not allow the cruelty of one bitter soul to define the legacy of her family. Even as Patricia's final, icy words echoed in the background, Evelyn's love for her daughter burned brighter than ever, a testament to the enduring power of compassion in a world that all too often seemed governed by cruelty and injustice. Patricia's reluctant agreement came out in a clipped tone that barely masked the lingering hostility. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice flat and unyielding, as if that one word could somehow erase the tension and cruelty that had defined every moment of the flight. For Evelyn Carter, sitting in her assigned seat with her daughter Zora by her side, that simple word resonated like a final verdict, a reminder that their lives, their family legacy, and even the small moments of joy were all being dictated by the whims of a woman whose bitterness ran deep. Even now, as she clutched Zora's hand a little tighter, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that Patricia's agreement was not born of genuine understanding, but of a calculated need to assert her superiority, to remind everyone that in her eyes, some families were more important than others. As the cabin settled into a cautious calm, Zora's bright curiosity broke through the tension. With the ease of a child who had yet to fully grasp the complexities of adult grievances, she introduced a kindly older passenger seated just across the aisle. "Mommy, this is Dr. Alina," she announced, her voice bubbling with innocent enthusiasm. Dr. Alina Diggs, an elegant woman with silver dreadlocks and eyes that sparkled with warmth, smiled broadly and knelt down to greet Zora. "I'm a scientist who studies rocks from space, and I also know your great-grandpa," she said, her tone both respectful and affectionate. "I was just telling your daughter that I had the honor of interviewing Captain Williams for my dissertation on segregated military units. In that moment, the small act of introduction softened the edges of the day's earlier hostility. But even as Dr. Diggs spoke, Evelyn's heart pounded with the memory of Patricia's cutting words and the stinging implication that their family was somehow lesser, that their pain and their history could be reduced to a bureaucratic inconvenience. Dr. Diggs continued, her voice measured and full of both pride and regret. I recognized your names when that flight attendant was asking questions. It's such a small world, isn't it? She remarked with a knowing smile. Evelyn managed a polite nod, though inside she battled a swirl of emotions, a mix of gratitude for the unexpected kindness and a deep-seated sorrow that her family's legacy had to be measured against the cruelty of others. It's lovely to meet you, Dr. Diggs, Evelyn replied, her voice soft yet carrying an unspoken plea for understanding. Dr. Diggs reached into her carry-on and produced a worn paperback. I always carry a few copies of my first book, Red Tail's Black Wings, The Untold Story of the Tuskegee Airman. Your great-grandfather's insights were invaluable, and Captain Williams is quoted extensively in Chapter 4. Would you like one for your daughter? She offered, extending not just a book, but a bridge to a past filled with both heroism and heartache. As the flight continued, Evelyn couldn't help but notice a subtle but significant shift in the behavior of the flight crew. Heather, the earlier dismissive attendant, now made frequent stops near their row, as if trying to compensate for her earlier callousness. Even the pilot, during a lull in the flight, took a moment to introduce himself and mentioned, almost casually, that his own grandfather had been a bomber pilot in Europe, a remark that seemed intended to reinforce a connection between the heroism of the past and the indignities of the present. Please convey my deepest respects to Captain Williams, he had said, his tone warm yet oddly distant. By the time the plane began its descent into LaGuardia, Evelyn's heart felt both heavy and oddly buoyed by the shared histories unfolding around her. 3 different passengers had approached, each offering their own connection to the Tuskegee Airman, and with each story, Zora's wide-eyed questions deepened the resonance of a legacy that was as inspiring as it was tragic. Mommy, Zora whispered as the landing gear deployed with a low, mechanical groan. I think Great-Grandpa must be like a real-life superhero. Evelyn squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling a mix of fierce pride and profound sorrow. In many ways he is, she said gently. But even superheroes sometimes don't get treated like heroes. That's something very important to remember. The words, spoken in a tone meant to be comforting, carried the weight of generations of hardship. When the plane touched down with a gentle bump and passengers began preparing to disembark, Patricia reappeared, this time accompanied by the captain himself. Ms. Carter, we'd like to invite you and Zora to exit first, the captain announced, his voice polite and measured. It's a small courtesy in honor of Captain Williams' service. As they walked through the first-class cabin toward the exit, Evelyn's eyes involuntarily darted to Dr. Whitley and his family. Dr. Whitley avoided Evelyn's steady gaze, his wife offering a small, almost embarrassed smile, while their son openly scrutinized Zora's bright yellow dress with the unabashed curiosity of a child. The contrast between the families couldn't have been starker. On the jetway, as the cool air of New York greeted them, Zora turned to her mother with unabashed excitement. I can't wait to tell Great-Grandpa everything that happened, she declared, her voice echoing the hope and innocence that made every slight and every act of cruelty all the more painful to witness. Evelyn nodded, though inside she wrestled with a storm of conflicting emotions. The thought of meeting her great-grandfather, Jeremiah Williams, brought both comfort and anxiety. His humility had always been as much a part of him as his valor, yet she wondered how he would react to the day's earlier events. In her experience, he rarely spoke of his wartime heroics, deflecting praise with a quiet grace that made every unkind word seem even more unnecessary. Before we do, Sunshine, she reminded Zora softly, remember that Great-Grandpa might not want to talk much about being a war hero. Sometimes those who have done brave things prefer not to relive the scars of battle. Zora nodded solemnly, much like a classmate who understood the unspoken grief of a loss that couldn't be mended by simple words. Just like how Miss Jeffers at school, Doesn't like talking about her brother who didn't come back from Afghanistan, she murmured, her voice trembling with a mixture of understanding and sorrow. Evelyn's heart ached with both pride at her daughter's perceptiveness and despair at the cruelty of a world that forced even the bravest souls to bear silent burdens. Their car service awaited them at the terminal, the driver holding a sign that read "Williams Family" in bold, proud letters. The 40-minute drive from LaGuardia to Jeremiah's brownstone in Harlem passed in a quiet blur, punctuated by Zora's endless barrage of questions about New York landmarks. Despite the neighborhood's rapid transformation, with new boutiques and coffee shops replacing familiar corners, the brownstone stood as a dignified constant, its stone steps immaculately swept and its brass fixtures gleaming under the afternoon sun. As they neared the home, Evelyn felt the usual cocktail of pride, anxiety, and guilt churn inside her. Guilt for the infrequent visits, anxiety about the toll time had taken on Jeremiah's frail body, and a quiet, defiant pride in the legacy that bound them together. When the door opened even before the car pulled up completely, Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. But what startled her most was not the sight of her great-grandfather or even the familiar home health aide. It was a tall, striking woman about her own age with flowing dark hair and unmistakable Williams eyes. "Olivia!" Evelyn gasped, momentarily frozen on the doorstep. "Hello, cousin," Olivia replied with a musical lilt that hinted at her Jamaican roots. "It's been such a long time." Behind her, a deep, weathered voice called out, "Are they here? Bring them in, bring them in!" Olivia stepped aside, her expression unreadable, yet carrying a quiet determination. Evelyn hesitated for just a moment before stepping forward, guiding Zora into the familiar foyer lined with dark wood paneling and framed historical photographs that chronicled decades of family triumphs and tragedy. In the sunlit living room, Jeremiah Williams sat in his favorite leather armchair. Despite the oxygen tube that hugged his face and the lap blanket covering his withered legs, his presence was as dignified as ever. At 93 years old, his once imposing frame had softened with time, yet his eyes remained as sharp and piercing as the stories they held. "There you are, my girls," he announced warmly, arms outstretched. "Come here and let me see you both." Zora, overwhelmed by the significance of the moment, approached with a shy reverence. "Hello, great-grandpa," she whispered, her voice laden with both excitement and the weight of expectation. Jeremiah's weathered face crinkled into a smile that seemed to momentarily erase decades of hardship. "Miss Zora Carter," he said, taking her small hands in his gnarled ones. "I've been waiting such a long time to meet you. That is one beautiful yellow dress you're wearing." Zora beamed. "It's my favorite color, great-grandpa. Mommy says it makes me shine like sunshine." Jeremiah's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he looked over at Evelyn. "Your mommy is absolutely right," he said softly, a note of genuine affection in his tone. "You've done so well, sweetheart. Really done well." The warmth of the reunion was, however, tempered by the unresolved tensions that had festered for years. As the formality between them dissolved, Evelyn crossed the room and embraced her great-grandfather, inhaling deeply the familiar scent of Old Spice aftershave mixed with the sweet hint of peppermint he always carried in his pocket. "I've missed you, Grandpa," she murmured, her voice cracking with emotion. "Missed you too, my dear," he replied, using the childhood nickname that once made her feel invincible. Then, with a subtle nod toward Olivia, who stood silently by the doorway, Jeremiah casually mentioned, "Your cousin Olivia has been keeping me company these past few months, since she moved all the way from London to help me remain independent." The revelation stirred up a pot of mixed feelings in Evelyn. Memories of summers spent together with Olivia surfaced, yet so did the bitter recollections of a 15-year silence. A silence born out of a bitter argument over family property in Jamaica, accusations of favoritism, and even a wedding that Evelyn had been forced to miss. "I didn't know you were in New York," she managed to say, the hurt still raw beneath her calm exterior. Olivia's reply was simple and matter-of-fact. Grandfather needed help, it just seemed like the right time for a change. The unspoken history between them hung thickly in the air, a heavy reminder that sometimes even family bonds can be strained by past grievances. Jeremiah, ever the mediator, quickly interjected, his voice firm yet gentle. "You two can sort out your grown-up nonsense later. Right now, I want to hear all about my great-granddaughter." With that, he beckoned Zora to sit by him, encouraging her to share every detail of her young, vibrant world, from the adventures in her second-grade classroom to the simple joys of her best friend Aisha. As Zora launched into her animated account of schoolyard tales and playful mishaps, Evelyn slipped into the kitchen alongside Olivia to prepare lunch, a modest meal of turkey sandwiches and iced tea. The clatter of dishes and the rhythmic chopping of tomatoes served as a quiet backdrop to a conversation laden with regret and resignation. "He's been asking about you," Olivia said quietly, her tone gentle as she sliced a tomato with precise, deliberate strokes, especially after his recent hospitalization. The news struck Evelyn like a physical blow. "Hospitalization? I didn't know," she managed, her voice tight with worry. Olivia explained matter-of-factly, "He had pneumonia. It was touch and go for a few days. He wouldn't let me call you because you've been so busy with your promotion and everything else." The unintentional rebuke stung deeply. Evelyn had long used her career as a shield against the complexities of family dynamics, burying herself in work as both refuge and excuse. "I should have been here," she whispered, a tear escaping her tired eyes. Olivia's voice softened further. "But you're here now, and you've brought Zora with you. That means more to him than anything else ever could." Back in the living room, the sound of Zora's excited voice recounted the earlier events on the airplane, a story that captured the cruel transformation of the so-called mean lady into someone almost reverent upon hearing about Jeremiah's heroism as a Tuskegee Airman. Evelyn tensed as she listened, conflicted emotions surging within her. A part of her longed to intervene, to shield her daughter from the painful echoes of discrimination and indignity. Yet Olivia gently placed a calming hand on her arm. "Let her tell it," Olivia urged quietly. "He needs to hear what your legacy means to others." And so, with the unfiltered honesty that only a child can muster, Zora described in vivid detail how Patricia's demeanor had shifted as soon as the name Jeremiah was mentioned, how the very air in the cabin seemed to crackle with the weight of history, and how, in that moment, the mean lady had become almost awestruck, admitting that her own father's life had been saved by a man who once flew in the war. "Did you really fly an airplane in a war, great-grandpa?" Zora asked in a voice that blended awe with the unspoiled candor of youth. Jeremiah's response was a quiet murmur, almost lost in the hum of conversation from the kitchen. Yet when Evelyn and Olivia brought the prepared lunch into the living room, they found him gently showing Zora a cherished Purple Heart medal he kept in a small drawer beside his chair. "Your great-grandfather was simply doing his duty," he explained, in a tone that mixed pride with a touch of melancholy, "like any other American. But remember, the color of a man's skin doesn't determine his courage or his commitment." Zora's eyes, wide with the pure, unvarnished truth of childhood, chimed in. "But the airplane people treated us different, until they knew your name." In that moment, as Jeremiah's gaze met Evelyn's over the rim of the table, an unspoken understanding passed between them. A shared recognition of battles fought on distant skies and in everyday moments of quiet cruelty. Jeremiah then patted the sofa beside him and said, "Come sit, all you Williams women. It's time for some family history." And so, over the simple fare of turkey sandwiches and iced tea, Jeremiah recounted his experiences as a black pilot in a segregated military, his voice low and steady as he wove tales of valor and quiet suffering. He spoke openly about returning home to a country that failed to honor his sacrifices, about the indignities he had endured while wearing the same uniform as white soldiers who were celebrated without question, and about the unending battle against prejudice that continued long after the war had ended. "We were fighting two wars," he explained to Zora, one against the Nazis overseas and another against the deep-seated racism at home. His eyes softened as he continued, and the sad truth, little sunshine, is that the second war isn't fully won yet. Zora's innocent inquiry followed almost immediately. Is that why those people wanted to move us on the plane, Great-Grandpa? Because of the second war? Jeremiah nodded slowly, his expression a blend of sorrow and resolve. Some battles are loud and obvious, like the marches and protests, but most are small and quiet, happening in airplanes, in restaurants, in schools. The important thing is to fight those battles with dignity and courage. As the conversation deepened, Zora's voice grew even more animated, her words spilling out with the unburdened truth of a child. "Just like you did when you kept flying planes even though they said you couldn't," she said, her tone part admiration, part puzzled innocence. Evelyn, listening with a heart heavy with both pride and pain, could only smile through her tears, the recollections of past humiliations. The dismissive looks, the cold commands, the unyielding cruelty of people like Patricia merged with the present, painting a picture of a family that had endured both historical and personal battles. It was a tapestry woven with threads of valor, sorrow, and an unbreakable will to rise above injustice. Between bites of sandwich and sips of iced tea, Evelyn found herself overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions. The warmth of her great-grandfather's words mingled with the bitter taste of earlier insults. The cruel indifference of a woman who had once treated her and Zora as if they were mere inconveniences. Even now, as she sat surrounded by the tangible evidence of her family's storied past, Evelyn could not ignore the scars left by the day's events. The memory of Patricia's cold, calculated cruelty was etched deeply in her heart, a stark reminder of a society that too often valued some lives over others. Yet in that same moment, as she watched Zora's eyes light up with unfiltered wonder, and as she listened to Jeremiah's brave recounting of battles fought both in the skies and on the ground, Evelyn felt a resolute determination rising within her, determination to honor her family's legacy, to stand tall in the face of injustice, and to ensure that the story of their lives, a story of courage, resilience, and quiet defiance, would never be forgotten. The conversation in the living room stretched on, a blend of tender recollections and the harsh realities of a past that continued to cast long shadows over the present. Olivia, ever the mediator, occasionally interjected with gentle reminders of the good times, of shared summers and laughter echoing through sunlit halls. But beneath the surface of these tender memories lay the unhealed wounds of long-forgotten arguments and unresolved disputes, wounds that, though hidden, added another layer of complexity to the reunion. Evelyn listened silently, her mind wandering back to the moment on the airplane when Patricia's icy demeanor had shifted ever so slightly at the sound of her great-grandfather's name. That fleeting moment of recognition, however brief, had been enough to expose the raw nerve of prejudice, a nerve that even after all these years still throbbed painfully. As the afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the polished wooden floor, Jeremiah leaned forward and said, "I want you to remember, my dear ones, that every scar, every slight, every act of cruelty we've endured has only made us stronger. We are the living proof that bravery and love can withstand even the harshest of storms." His voice, though frail, carried an authority that silenced any lingering doubts. Zora, her eyes wide and attentive, asked in a hushed tone, "But Great-Grandpa, does that mean that even when people are mean to us, we should keep shining like sunshine?" Jeremiah smiled, a slow, measured smile that spoke of battles fought and won. "Yes, little sunshine, exactly that. We shine because we must, because our light is the beacon that guides us through the darkness of intolerance." Evelyn's heart swelled with a bittersweet mix of pride and sorrow. In that moment, every slight, every painful encounter from earlier that day was overshadowed by the resilience of her family. A resilience built not just on heroism in battle, but on the quiet, everyday acts of love and courage. She realized that while the cruelty of individuals like Patricia might never fully fade, it was the collective strength and unwavering spirit of families like hers that would ultimately pave the way for a more compassionate future. As the conversation wound down and the afternoon gave way to the soft glow of early evening, Evelyn excused herself briefly to step outside onto the stoop. The cool air of Harlem wrapped around her like a familiar blanket, and she allowed herself a moment to reflect on the day's tumultuous events. She thought about the harsh words, the subtle yet biting discrimination, and the pervasive sense of being undervalued simply because of who she was. Yet, in the same breath, she recalled the powerful words of Jeremiah and the pure, unspoiled hope in Zora's eyes. It was a reminder that even in the face of cruelty, the human spirit could find a way to shine through. Returning inside, Evelyn joined Olivia and the rest of the family around the dining table. They shared quiet smiles and gentle nods, a silent acknowledgement of the battles fought and the victories, however small, that had been won that day. Over a final round of iced tea and soft laughter that slowly replaced the earlier tension, the family began to discuss plans for the next day. Plans that included revisiting old family photos, recalling even more stories of valor, and, perhaps, in time, addressing the rift that had once driven a wedge between cousins. Though the wounds of the past were still fresh in some corners, there was an unspoken hope that, with time, forgiveness and understanding might prevail. In that moment, as the shadows lengthened and the day drew to a close, Evelyn Carter felt a renewed sense of resolve. She knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, that the echoes of prejudice and cruelty would continue to haunt her and her family. But she also knew that the strength of their shared history, the heroism of Jeremiah Williams, the quiet dignity of every woman and man who had ever fought against injustice, was a force that no amount of cruelty could ever extinguish. With Zora's gentle hand in hers and the steady presence of her great-grandfather and her long-lost cousin by her side, Evelyn felt empowered to face whatever came next, confident that even in a world that so often seemed governed by cruelty, there was still light enough to guide them forward. As the evening wound on and the family slowly began to disperse into the quiet rooms of the old brownstone, Evelyn lingered in the doorway of the living room, her thoughts heavy yet hopeful. The day had been marked by both the sting of discrimination and the warmth of familial love, a paradox that encapsulated the very essence of their lives. She whispered softly to herself, "We will continue to shine no matter how dark the world may seem." And as she turned to join Zora, who was already chattering excitedly about the adventures awaiting them the next day, Evelyn knew that despite the cruelty of those who sought to diminish their light, their family legacy would endure. Their story, fraught with pain yet brimming with resilience, was a testament to the unyielding power of love. A power that, even in the face of the coldest cruelty, would always find a way to illuminate the path forward. In the days that followed, as the family gathered more frequently, the conversations turned toward reconciling old differences and finding new ways to honor the sacrifices of the past. Evelyn made it her mission to ensure that every member of the family, from the youngest child to the eldest relative, understood the significance of their shared heritage. She spoke with quiet determination about the need to stand against injustice, drawing on the examples set by Jeremiah and the brave souls of the Tuskegee Airmen. And though the memory of Patricia's callous behavior on that fateful flight still haunted her, it also served as a stark reminder of the work that remained to be done, a work that, she believed, could only be achieved through unyielding compassion and relentless perseverance. Looking back on that day now, Evelyn Carter would later recall it as a turning point, a moment when the painful legacy of discrimination collided head-on with the indomitable spirit of her family. It was a day filled with bitter conflict and cruel words, yet it was also a day marked by moments of deep connection and understanding. In every conversation, every shared meal, and every tear shed in silent solidarity, there lay a promise that the past would not dictate the future, even as the world around them continued to be marred by acts of cruelty and injustice. Evelyn knew that the love and resilience of her family would serve as a beacon of hope for generations to come. And so, as the story of that day was passed down through quiet conversations over warm cups of iced tea and during long, reflective walks through the streets of Harlem, the legacy of Jeremiah Williams and the courage of his descendants became a rallying cry, a reminder that even in the harshest of circumstances, the human spirit has the power to overcome. For Evelyn Carter, that day was not just about enduring the cruelty of a callous stranger. It was about reclaiming her family's narrative, about showing the world that the light of a single, determined soul could ignite a fire of change that would burn bright against even the darkest night. In the end, the echoes of that long, tumultuous day resonated far beyond the confines of a single airplane flight or a brief reunion in an old brownstone. They wove themselves into the fabric of a family's shared history, a history marked by both sorrow and triumph, cruelty and compassion. And as Evelyn Carter continued to share her story with anyone who would listen, her voice, steady, clear, and filled with unyielding resolve, became a testament to the truth that no amount of cruelty could ever extinguish the brilliant light of a soul determined to shine. Exactly like that, Jeremiah's eyes twinkled with a gentle warmth as he listened to the conversation unfolding around him. His words, though few, carried the weight of a lifetime of struggles and quiet triumphs. He said, "Just as your mommy does every day in her big corporate job, and as your cousin Olivia does with her photography that shows the truth of people's lives." At that moment, Evelyn Carter glanced at Olivia in surprise, remembering all too well how the world had once tried to silence their family's voice. "You're still photographing? I thought you went into finance after university," Evelyn asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and a trace of bitterness for all the years that had passed with unspoken regrets. Olivia smiled ruefully and replied, "I did both. Banking paid the bills, but photography kept me sane." After a thoughtful pause, she added, "Actually, I have a gallery opening next week, my first solo exhibition here in New York." Evelyn's eyes softened, and she said sincerely, "That's wonderful. What's the focus of your work?" With a meaningful glance toward their venerable grandfather, Olivia answered, "Legacy. Specifically, I'm exploring the descendants of the Tuskegee Airmen and how their lives have been shaped by that inheritance of courage and dignity." The conversation took an unexpected turn, and as Olivia revealed dimensions of her life that Evelyn had long missed during their estranged years, a familiar pang of regret pierced Evelyn's heart for the wasted time between them. "I'd love to see your work," Evelyn offered hesitantly. "Maybe we could extend our stay for a few more days." Jeremiah beamed at the suggestion, his face lighting up with pride and a touch of mischievous delight. However, before he could respond further, a sudden coughing fit seized him, harsh and relentless enough to rattle his frail frame and remind everyone present of the inevitable decline that time brings. Olivier immediately moved to his side, gently adjusting his oxygen and offering him a sip of water, while Evelyn hurried a worried-looking little Zora into the kitchen under the pretext of preparing dessert. "Is Great-Grandpa going to be okay?" Zora whispered, her earlier excitement now subdued by concern. Evelyn carefully knelt down and said, "Great-Grandpa is very old, Sunshine. His body gets tired easily, but right now he's okay, and he's so happy that we're here." Later, when they returned with bowls of vanilla ice cream, his favorite since he was a young boy, the old man had recovered his composure, though the episode had clearly sapped his energy and left a lingering shadow of vulnerability. Despite the setback, Jeremiah insisted on continuing the family gathering and steered the conversation toward lighter topics. "Now, Zora," he said softly as Olivia assisted him with his dessert. "Your mommy tells me that you're quite the artist. Did you bring any of your drawings for your old great-grandfather to see?" The afternoon passed in a haze of gentle reminiscence and new connections, as Zora proudly displayed her artwork while absorbing family stories with the rapt attention only a child can muster. As evening approached, Jeremiah reluctantly acknowledged his need for rest. Yet before retiring, he extracted heartfelt promises from both Evelyn and Zora to return first thing in the morning. He added with a conspiratorial smile as Olivia guided him slowly toward his bedroom, "There's something important in my study I need to discuss with you tomorrow. It's just some legal papers and matters of legacy, nothing that can't wait until morning." That night, in the modest guest room they were sharing, Zora curled up against Evelyn's side as they read together by the soft glow of a bedside lamp, the quiet murmur of their voices mingling with the distant sounds of the old brownstone settling into sleep. During a pause between chapters, Zora spoke softly, "Mommy, I wish we could stay with Great-Grandpa forever." Evelyn stroked her daughter's hair and with a mixture of tenderness and melancholy replied, "What about school and your friends? And Ellie would miss her elephant bedroom." Zora, ever the voice of simple logic, countered, "We could bring Ellie here and I could make new friends. Great-Grandpa needs us more than my school does." The innocent observation landed heavily on Evelyn's heart. She had built her life in Atlanta deliberately, establishing a successful career and a supportive community, while maintaining just enough connection to her New York roots to honor family obligations. Yet, seeing her grandfather so frail today, though still the unwavering moral center of their family, unsettled the carefully constructed boundaries she had built over the years. "Let's enjoy our visit first," she suggested gently. "Big decisions need lots of thinking time." The next morning, Evelyn woke early and left Zora sleeping peacefully, surrounded by the familiar comfort of her cherished stuffed animals. In the kitchen, she found Olivia already dressed for the day and busily preparing coffee, the aroma filling the modest space with a promise of warmth and resilience. "He had a good night," Olivia reported before Evelyn could even ask. "The home health aide stayed over. She's helping him get ready now." Accepting the offered coffee with a tired smile, Evelyn murmured, "Thank you for being here with him. I should have visited more often." Olivia shrugged, her tone laced with the honesty of someone who had made her own choices and carried her own regrets. "We all make choices, Evelyn. I made plenty of my own that I regret," she admitted, then hesitated before adding, "You know he kept every article about your promotions. You know he even has a scrapbook in his study." Evelyn blinked in surprise as she recalled how her grandfather had always spoken of her breaking glass ceilings in the corporate world. It struck her deeply that he regarded her professional achievements with both pride and a hint of bewilderment, as if her career was something almost too modern and detached from the old struggles of his own generation. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice catching with the weight of years lost and the painful gap that had grown between her and her grandfather's expectation. "There's a lot we don't know about each other anymore," Olivia observed softly. 15 years is a long time." Before Evelyn could muster a reply, Jeremiah's voice called out from his study, "Is that coffee I smell? Bring some in here and tell Evelyn I'm ready to talk business if she's awake." In the wood-paneled study, Jeremiah's sanctuary and the repository of family memories, Evelyn found him dressed impeccably in pressed slacks and a cardigan. He was seated at the antique desk that had once belonged to his own father, though an oxygen canister stood nearby as a silent reminder of his fragility. He had removed the tube for now, determined to project strength and dignity. "Sit down, little one," he said, gesturing toward the leather chair opposite his. "We have important things to discuss before Zora wakes up." The seriousness in his tone sent a shiver down Evelyn's spine, and she asked hesitantly, "Grandpa, are you all right?" He waved her concern away with a reassuring smile. "I'm old, not dying any faster than yesterday, but I need to put my affairs in order. Your visit presents the perfect opportunity." With that, he slid a folder across the desk. "These are the papers for this house. I'm placing it in a trust for Zora's education, with you as the trustee." Evelyn stared at the documents, stunned. The Harlem brownstone was not only a significant financial asset in New York's cutthroat real estate market, but it was also the Williams family anchor, the heartbeat of 3 generations. "Grandpa, I can't accept this," she protested softly, feeling the burden of responsibility settling over her like an unwelcome shroud. Jeremiah leaned forward, his eyes burning with a passion that belied his age. "What about Olivia and your other grandchildren?" "Olivia gets the property in Jamaica. It's already arranged. And your cousins. They've each received their share of my savings." His gaze grew even more intense as he continued. "This isn't about money, Evelyn. It's about legacy. This house holds history within its walls, not just our family's stories, but the stories of our peoples. Langston Hughes once sat in that very chair you're sitting in, discussing poetry with my father." He paused, his voice growing soft yet resolute. "Thurgood Marshall planned legal strategies at our dining table. When I'm gone, someone must be the guardian of those stories." Evelyn felt the weight of his words and the deep responsibility they imposed on her shoulders. "But we live in Atlanta. I have my career and Zora has school. Careers change and schools exist everywhere," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly with the enormity of the decisions she was being forced to consider. Jeremiah's tone remained matter-of-fact as he replied, "I'm not asking you to decide this minute. The papers will be waiting when you're ready." Then, leaning back as if preparing to reveal a deeper secret, he added, "There's something else I want to show you." From the desk drawer, he withdrew an aged leather portfolio. Its contents were letters. Dozens of them, yellowed with time but carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. "After what happened on your flight yesterday," he explained quietly, "I thought it might be time to share these." He continued, "These letters are from the families of bomber crews we escorted. They are from white boys from farms and cities across America who came home because we did not abandon them, even when our own country had abandoned us in so many ways." Evelyn gently turned the pages, reading snippets of heartfelt gratitude, mothers thanking him for saving their sons, children expressing relief at having a father, veterans recalling the distinctive red tails of the P-51 Mustangs as a symbol of salvation emerging from chaos. "You never showed these to anyone?" she asked, deeply moved by the raw honesty in the faded ink. Jeremiah shook his head slowly. "Your grandmother knew about them, but in the 1950s, a black man couldn't showcase his heroism openly. Drawing attention to oneself was dangerous, even for a war hero." He closed the portfolio with a solemn finality. "But now, with all this talk of erasing our history and pretending that America was always fair and just, these letters tell a different story, one that Zora and her generation must know." Their serious discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Zora herself, sleep-troubled yet buzzing with excitement for another day with her great-grandfather. The conversation soon gave way to the practicalities of breakfast and planning the day's activities, but Evelyn couldn't shake the heavy burden of the decisions looming before her. Later that morning, while Olivia took Zora to the corner bakery to select fresh pastries for lunch, Evelyn found herself alone with Jeremiah again. He sat in his favorite chair, his eyes distant as if lost in memories until he noticed her watching him. "You're troubled by what I've proposed," he stated rather than asked, his tone gentle but unyielding. Evelyn sat beside him, her voice low as she confessed, "It's a lot to consider, moving across the country, changing Zora's school, even leaving my position at Horizon. These aren't small adjustments." Jeremiah nodded in agreement. "No, they aren't. And I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe it was important, not just for me, but for you and for Zora." Evelyn's eyes searched his face for understanding, and he continued, "Evelyn, you've achieved remarkable things in a world that never made it easy for you. I couldn't be prouder. Yet I have watched you build your life like a fortress, advancing professionally while keeping emotional ties at arm's length." His observation, uncomfortably accurate, pierced her heart. Since her divorce from Zora's father 5 years ago, she had dedicated herself entirely to her career and to being a steadfast mother, leaving little room for other connections. "I'm providing security for Zora," she defended softly. "Building a future where she'll have opportunities I never had." Jeremiah's eyes softened as he said, "And that is admirable. But security isn't only measured in dollars and cents. It is also knowing your roots, understanding the shoulders you stand on. Look at that yellow dress that Zora loves so much. It is the exact shade your grandmother wore on our wedding day. For a long moment, Evelyn was silent, struck by the realization that she had never fully appreciated the depth of family history that she had passed on so lightly. Zora had never met Virginia, yet something of her spirit lived on in that little girl, a connection that Evelyn had neglected to recognize. Before Evelyn could voice her conflicted emotions, the front door opened, heralding the return of Zora and Olivia. The conversation shifted as they rejoined the household, but Jeremiah's words lingered in her mind throughout the day. She observed how Zora blossomed in the brownstones' historical embrace, how Olivia and her grandfather exchanged shorthand references to neighbors and local characters, and how the very walls of the house seemed to hold them all together in a continuity that transcended time and space. That evening, after Zora had been tucked into bed with tender stories of her grandmother Virginia's childhood adventures, Evelyn and Olivia sat on the small back patio of the brownstone. They shared a bottle of wine under the soft glow of the garden that Jeremiah had lovingly maintained for decades. Olivia, refilling their glasses with a steady hand, remarked, "He's making a compelling case for you to relocate, Evelyn. Our grandfather is as relentless as ever." Evelyn smiled ruefully, the bittersweet taste of regret mingling with a faint hope for reconciliation. "Some things never change," she said quietly, then added with a trembling sincerity, "I'm sorry about how things ended between us, about the property dispute and the things I said at Uncle Marcus's funeral. I was wrong." Olivia studied her wine thoughtfully before replying. "We both said things we regret. Family has a way of finding our most tender spots, even after all these years. I've missed you, Evelyn. And I've missed Zora too, though I only knew her through grandfather's stories until now. She's incredible." Evelyn's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she acknowledged, "She is smarter than I was at her age and more confident too. When that flight attendant tried to move us on the plane, Zora saw exactly what was happening. She's only 7, but she already recognizes when she's being treated differently because of her race." The mention of that callous flight attendant, whose cruelty had cut deep into Evelyn's soul, brought a fresh wave of anguish. It was a painful reminder of all the times in her life when society had tried to diminish her worth simply because of the color of her skin. "It's a heavy inheritance," Olivia agreed softly, "but she also inherits strength from this family, from you, from grandfather, from everyone who came before us." Their conversation soon turned to Olivia's upcoming photography exhibit, and Evelyn was struck by how her cousin's work so powerfully explored themes that she herself had grappled with for so long. In the warm, lingering light of the evening, as they sipped wine and recounted memories of both pain and hope, Evelyn felt an overwhelming mixture of emotions. The ghosts of past cruelties, those moments on the airplane when the world had treated her and her daughter as if they were less than human, seemed to merge with the present. Yet there was also a glimmer of promise in the air, a belief that the enduring strength of their family could overcome even the deepest wounds. In that moment, Evelyn vowed silently to herself that she would no longer allow the cruelty of the past to dictate her future. She would embrace her heritage, honor the sacrifices of those who had come before, and ensure that Zora would grow up with the full measure of her family. The next morning dawned cool and clear, and as Evelyn prepared for the day, she recalled Jeremiah's impassioned words from the previous night. With a heavy heart but determined resolve, she joined her grandfather in his study once again. This time, the conversation took on a new urgency. "I know you're troubled by what I've proposed," Jeremiah began, his voice calm yet insistent. "But this isn't just about relocating or changing schools. It's about ensuring that you, Zora, and all of us never forget where we came from." Evelyn listened, her mind swirling with the implications of the trust, the legacy of the Harlem brownstone, and the deep cultural history that it represented. "I understand," she said softly, but it feels as if I'm being asked to uproot my entire life, to leave behind all that I've built in it. Jeremiah's eyes, though tired, shone with unwavering conviction. Sometimes, my dear, the hardest decisions are the ones that protect what is most precious. I'm not asking you to abandon your career or your community. I'm asking you to consider that security isn't solely measured in the balance of a bank account. It is measured in the memories that live within these walls, in the stories that bind us together, and in the hope that our struggles and triumphs will light the way for future generations. As the day unfolded, Evelyn found herself grappling with a profound inner conflict. On one hand, she had spent years forging a successful career, shielding herself from the vulnerability that came with deep familial ties. On the other hand, the legacy of her great-grandfather and the undeniable pull of her heritage stirred something within her, a longing to reconnect with the roots she had once taken for granted. Throughout the day, she noticed little details that reminded her of what she had lost in her pursuit of professional success. The way Zora's eyes lit up when she talked about her artwork, the quiet pride in Olivia's voice when recounting stories of the past, and even the enduring, steadfast presence of Jeremiah in the very heart of the brownstone. That evening, as the family gathered around the dining table for a modest but heartfelt meal of turkey sandwiches and iced tea, the conversations took on an unexpectedly reflective tone. Memories of past injustices, the cold indifference of that flight attendant who had once tried to move them, the subtle cruelties of a society that had long devalued them, mingled with stories of triumph and resilience. Evelyn felt an acute sadness for all the times she had been made to feel less worthy simply because of who she was. And yet, in the gentle cadence of her great-grandfather's voice recounting the bravery of the Tuskegee Airmen and the quiet dignity that had carried him through decades of adversity, there emerged a sense of hope. After dinner, as the family slowly dispersed into the warm embrace of the brownstone's quiet rooms, Evelyn found herself lingering in the doorway of the living room. She thought back to all the painful moments, the dismissive glances, the callous words of strangers who had once tried to belittle her, and felt a profound pity for the countless sacrifices she had made to survive in a world that often refused to see her. But in that same reflective moment, the tender laughter of Zora, the gentle reassurance of Olivia, and the enduring legacy of Jeremiah converged to remind her that, despite the cruelty of some, the love and resilience of her family would always be her guiding light. In the days that followed, as Evelyn spent more time in the comforting embrace of the Harlem brownstone, she began to see the true value of the legacy that her great-grandfather had fought so hard to preserve. The old photographs, the carefully kept letters, and the quiet determination in Jeremiah's eyes all served as reminders that the struggles of the past had paved the way for the hope of the future. With each passing day, the conflict between her corporate life in Atlanta and the pull of her familial heritage grew ever more intense, forcing her to confront painful truths about the choices she had made. And yet, in that confrontation, she also discovered a deep well of strength, one that had been nurtured by generations of Williams women who had weathered storms far worse than her own inner turmoil. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast long, gentle shadows across the polished wooden floors of the brownstone, Evelyn found herself alone with Olivia on the back patio once more. They sat together, sharing a quiet bottle of wine as they reflected on the long path that had led them to this point. "I've been thinking," Evelyn began slowly, her voice tinged with both regret and hope, "about all the times I've tried to build walls around myself in Atlanta to protect what I thought was my hard-won success. But now I see that those walls also kept me from truly embracing who I am and where I come from." Olivia reached out, squeezing her hand in a gesture of solidarity. "Sometimes," she said gently, "the fiercest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves. And it takes a lot of courage to tear down those walls, even when it means facing painful memories and unresolved conflicts." Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she recalled the cold cruelty of that flight attendant, the one who had once treated her and Zora as if they were mere inconveniences, simply because of their skin color. "I still remember how my heart sank that day," she whispered, feeling so small and unworthy. "It's a wound that never truly heals." Olivia's voice was soft but firm as she replied, "But that wound is also the source of your strength. You are a testament to the resilience of our family, and though the world may try to diminish your light, you have every right to shine bright for Zora and for all of us." In that moment, Evelyn realized that the conflict she had long tried to avoid, the tension between her corporate ambitions and her deeply rooted familial obligations, was not a burden to be borne alone, but a legacy to be shared with those who loved her. The very papers that Jeremiah had placed before her were not just legal documents or financial assets. They were symbols of a history that demanded recognition, a history that deserved to be preserved and passed on to future generations. With renewed determination, Evelyn resolved to embrace this duality of her existence. She would honor the sacrifices of her ancestors, stand up against the lingering cruelty of those who still sought to belittle her, and ensure that Zora would grow up knowing the full measure of her family's indomitable spirit. As the days turned into weeks, the brownstone became a living classroom where every corner whispered stories of courage, every faded photograph recounted moments of triumph over adversity, and every conversation, even the painful ones, wove together the complex tapestry of their shared legacy. Evelyn began to see that the very conflicts that had once pained her now served as bridges connecting her to a deeper understanding of herself. The memories of those harsh encounters on airplanes, in stores, and in boardrooms gradually transformed from scars into badges of honor, each one a reminder of the battles fought and won by the Williams family. One crisp morning, as Evelyn stood by a window looking out at the bustling streets of Harlem, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the cold indifference of corporate boardrooms in Atlanta to the warm, though at times painful, embrace of her ancestral home. The thought of leaving behind the world she had built tugged at her heart, but the promise of a legacy steeped in history and resilience was too powerful to ignore. With quiet resolve, she made a decision that would change the course of her life. She would open herself up to the possibility of merging the two worlds, finding a balance between the career she had fought so hard to establish and the rich heritage that beckoned her home. Later that day, as she joined Olivia and Jeremiah for another family meal, Evelyn felt a profound sense of clarity. The tensions that had once defined her existence, both the cruelty of strangers like that flight attendant and the internal battles waged between ambition and identity, began to subside, replaced by a steady commitment to forge a future that honored every part of who she was. In that moment, she understood that every act of cruelty, every dismissive word, had only served to strengthen her resolve, and though the scars of the past remained, they no longer defined her. Instead, they became stepping stones, leading toward a future where the light of the Williams legacy shone brighter than ever. That evening, as the soft glow of twilight bathed the brownstone in gentle hues, Evelyn sat quietly with Zora on the back patio, the distant sounds of the city mingling with the tender murmur of family voices inside. "Mommy," Zora said softly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of wonder and quiet determination, "I want to remember all these stories forever." Evelyn pulled her daughter close, feeling both the weight of responsibility and the overwhelming love that only a mother can know. "We will, sweetheart," she promised, "because every story, every memory is part of who we are, and no one, not even those who try to treat us like less than we are, can ever take that away." In that promise lay the quiet defiance of a woman who had seen too much cruelty to ever allow it to dim her light, and the tender hope that the next generation would carry that light forward. In the weeks that followed, as discussions about the future unfolded slowly and tenderly over shared meals, quiet walks through familiar neighborhoods, and the measured pace of everyday life in Harlem, Evelyn began to see that the conflict between her two worlds was not a chasm to be bridged by compromise, but a dynamic tension that could inspire growth. The legacy that Jeremiah had entrusted to her was not merely an inheritance of property and history. It was a call to action, a call to honor the struggles of the past by building a future defined by compassion, strength, and unyielding resilience. And even as she recalled the cruelty of those who had once tried to push her aside, Evelyn felt a deep and abiding compassion for herself, a recognition that every sacrifice, every moment of pain, had brought her closer to the woman she was today. Standing at the threshold of a new chapter, Evelyn Carter embraced the truth that her life was not a series of isolated events, but a continuum of love, struggle, and ultimately triumph. The callous actions of strangers and the bitter conflicts of the past would forever be a part of her story, but they no longer held the power to define her destiny. Instead, they served as a reminder that even in a world that often seemed governed by cruelty and indifference, the human spirit, nurtured by family, fortified by history, and guided by love, had the power to shine through the darkest of nights. And so, as the sun set over Harlem one cool evening, casting long, gentle shadows across the brownstone's time-worn facade, Evelyn sat with Olivia and Jeremiah on that familiar back patio. With a quiet smile and a heart both heavy and hopeful, she raised her glass in a silent toast to the past that had shaped them, to the present that united them, and to the future that beckoned with the promise of new beginnings. In that moment, amidst the soft clink of glasses and the whispered cadence of family recollections, Evelyn Carter realized that she was not alone in her struggles. The legacy of the Williams family was not defined by the cruelty of those who sought to diminish their worth, but by the enduring spirit of love and resilience that had been passed down through generations. A spirit that would, against all odds, continue to shine brightly for years to come. And as the night deepened and the conversation turned to plans for the days ahead, discussions of art exhibitions, community gatherings, and the possibility of a future more intertwined with the rich tapestry of Harlem, Evelyn felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges of moving, of redefining her life's work, and of reconciling the conflicting demands of her career and her heritage were daunting, yet they also carried the promise of transformation. With every shared smile, every tear shed in quiet understanding, and every story recounted with the heartfelt sincerity of someone who had lived through both triumph and pain, she began to see that her future could be a harmonious blend of all the worlds she cherished. In the gentle embrace of that Harlem night, as the soft strains of distant music mingled with the murmurs of family and friends, Evelyn Carter made a quiet vow to herself. She would honor the legacy of her ancestors by allowing their stories to guide her, by embracing the struggles that had once tried to hold her back, and by ensuring that Zora would grow up in a world where her worth was never questioned. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but she no longer feared the future. Instead, she faced it with the knowledge that every act of cruelty she had endured had only deepened her resolve to create a better, more compassionate world. A world where the light of a single, determined soul could indeed ignite a fire of change that would burn bright against even the darkest night. In that steadfast moment, surrounded by the tangible echoes of a proud past and the gentle reassurance of family bonds, Evelyn Carter understood that her life's journey was not just about overcoming adversity. It was about celebrating the beauty of resilience, the power of love, and the unbreakable thread of legacy that connected her to every Williams who had come before. And with that understanding, she stepped forward into a future that, though uncertain, promised the kind of healing and hope that could only be born from the depths of a hard-fought struggle for dignity and justice. By the time they finished the wine, tentative plans were made for Evelyn to bring Zora to the gallery opening next week, extending their New York stay. Days passed in a gentle rhythm as Evelyn, Zora, and Olivia shared meals, visited Jeremiah's favorite Harlem landmarks, and listened to family stories that enriched Zora's understanding of her legacy. Yet even as they embraced their heritage, the sting of past cruelty still haunted Evelyn. An unexpected call from her boss at Horizon Media demanded she cut the visit short to join a critical meeting in Atlanta. The executive team expected her to sacrifice family for career, a demand that reopened old wounds from hurtful encounters on flights and in boardrooms. Watching Zora help Jeremiah tend his prized rose bushes, Evelyn made a bold choice. "I can join virtually," she said firmly, her voice steady despite lingering pain. At Olivia's gallery opening in Chelsea, powerful photographs honored the descendants of the Tuskegee Airmen and celebrated Jeremiah's true heroism. An elegant elderly woman recounted how her late husband was saved by Jeremiah's courage. As Evelyn embraced Zora, she realized that despite the cruelty of some, her family's legacy and love were worth every sacrifice.